Q and Review Print Speaking to the Blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @QuenReview, that is @ CUEANDREVIEW. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@quenreview.com. That is INFORMATION @CUEANDREVIEW.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
The Herald, Wednesday the 25th of January 2023. News. Male heart deaths in Scotland at highest number in a decade. This article is by Helen McCardle. The number of men in Scotland dying as a result of heart disease and heart failure rose to its highest level in a decade during the pandemic. A new report from Public Health Scotland shows that there were 17,280 deaths among men of all ages from heart disease, heart failure, or heart attacks combined in 2021. It is the first time since 2012 that the number of deaths has exceeded 17,000. While most of the increase has been driven by an ageing population, the figures show that the mortality rate from heart failure among men jumped by 37% between 2019 and 2021, even after adjusting for changing demographics. Heart failure means that the heart is unable to pump blood around the body properly. It is most commonly caused by coronary artery disease, where fatty deposits build up in the arteries, reduces blood flow, but can also be triggered by high blood pressure, a previous heart attack, or a virus which leads to cardiac muscle becoming weak or stiff. The PHS report shows that the age standardised mortality rate from heart failure among men in Scotland had fallen steadily from 126 deaths per 100,000 in 2012 to a low of 79 in 2019, before rebounding to 89 deaths per 100,000 in 2020 and 109 deaths per 100,000 in 2021. Men over 75 account for around a third of male heart failure deaths in Scotland, but the change in mortality rates was most obvious among those aged 45 to 74. Between 2019 and 2021, the mortality rate climbed from 0.3 to 1.5 per 100,000 in the 45 to 64 age group, and from 6.1 to 11.2 per 100,000 in the 65 to 74 age group. The increase may be partly skewed by comparatively small numbers. However, with a total of 19 heart failure deaths among men aged 45 to 74 in 2019 versus 43 in 2021. COVID has been associated with damage to the heart and increased risk of blood clots, which can lead to heart attacks, but it is unclear whether the pandemic has played a direct role in these figures. The PHS report notes that progress in tackling cardiac-related deaths was stalling before COVID, stating that while there has been a 19% reduction in deaths from coronary heart disease in Scotland over the last 10 years, the rate of decline has slowed in the last 5 years. Survival in the first 30 days following a heart attack is also largely unchanged over the past decade, said PHS. Stroke campaigners also voiced concerns that people in Scotland continue to be much more likely to suffer a stroke compared to people in other parts of the UK, although the gap in the mortality rate between Scotland and England is around a quarter of what it was in 1969. The figures from PHS also shows that the number of men in Scotland suffering a fatal stroke climbed from a low of 1,867 in 2019 to 2,132 in 2021. The mortality rate adjusted for age also increased from 427 to 463 deaths per 100,000, up 8%. However, this compares to 575 per 100,000 in 2012. John Watson, Associate Director for the Stroke Association, said stroke rates in Scotland are a third higher than for the UK as a whole. We need to see much faster progress if we are to reduce the devastating personal cost of stroke and bring Scotland more in line with its neighbours. Worryingly, this report shows that stroke incidence among men has actually increased slightly. And those in the most deprived areas are almost twice as likely to be discharged from hospital with a stroke, a gap that has widened in the last year. Mr. Watson said the charity wanted to see concerted action to address Scotland's unacceptably high stroke numbers, including increased awareness of undiagnosed atrial fibrillation, a form of irregular heartbeat that significantly increases stroke risk. Jane Claire Judson, Chief Executive of Chest, Heart and Stroke Scotland, said the growing number of strokes and heart disease cases means there will be rising demand for support to help people rebuild their lives once they get home from hospital. She added, people tell us when they leave hospital is when they feel most scared and alone. That has very real consequences for their health and pressures on local health and care services. We need to see bold action to stop the crisis in community care from escalating. It comes as senior dentists have warned the system in Scotland is broken after separate statistics from PHS revealed declining attendance rates, particularly among the most deprived communities. While 95.4% of the population were registered with an NHS dentist at the end of September, only half had actually seen a dentist within the past 2 years, compared to around 70% in 2019. The gulf in participation rates between the most and least affluent is also the widest on record, with children and adults from the poorest areas respectively 20% and 11% less likely to have seen a dentist on the NHS. David McCall, chair of the BDA's Scottish Dental Practice Committee, said patients in Scotland's poorest communities are paying the price for the crisis in dentistry. The Scottish Government must not try to hide behind positive-sounding registration figures. The reality is patient participation remains on the floor and inequalities are set to widen. Dentists are reconsidering their futures working in a broken system. NHS dentistry is on the critical list and real reform won't wait. This article is by Helen McCardle. The Herald, Thursday the 26th of January 2023. News. Scotland Travel. Ryanair unveils first of fleet of greener planes. This article is by Craig Williams. Budget air travel in Europe is set to be revolutionised as Ryanair prepares to unveil its first retrofitted greener plane in Scotland. The eyes of the global aviation community are focused firmly on Prestwick Airport as they await the departure of the first new Ryanair Boeing 737-800 aircraft to feature a new device being installed as part of a multi-million-pound retrofit programme. Ryanair, Europe's biggest airline, has signed a deal worth £140 million with aviation partners Boeing, APB, to install split scimitar winglets on its entire fleet of 409 Boeing 737-800s next-generation aircraft. Ryanair says the modification will improve aircraft fuel efficiency by up to 1.5%, reducing the airline's annual fuel consumption by 65 million litres and carbon emissions by 165,000 tonnes. Winglets, the vertical tips at the end of many commercial aircraft wings, are designed to reduce drag and therefore increase fuel efficiency. Designed, developed and certified by APB, split scimitar winglets are named after a Middle Eastern sword with distinct curved blades ending with a sharp point. The winglets consist of aerodynamic revisions to the wingtip, replacing the aluminium tip with the curved scimitar-shaped tip cap. A further ventral strake, also scimitar-shaped, is added below. They are a modification on APB's blended winglet extensions to airplane wings, which first appeared in 2001. Ryanair started the operation to retrofit all its Boeing B737-800 next-generation fleet with split scimitar winglets with a 2006-built aircraft EI-DLY at Glasgow Prestwick Airport. Flight tracking data from website Flight Trader 24 shows the plane arrived at Prestwick from Birmingham Airport in the early hours of January the 5th to undergo the retrofit. Ryanair confirmed to the Herald that the retrofit programme of its full next-generation fleet will be fitted at Prestwick alongside other Ryanair facilities across Europe. As well as having a base at the airport, Ryanair have a heavy maintenance repair and overhaul facility which operates across 5 bays within 2 purpose-built aircraft hangars. The new Ryanair B737-800 aircraft is currently on the ground in Prestwick and is expected to be rolled out of the hangar in the coming days. The initiative also furthers Ryanair's target of net zero by 2050 as the airline grows to carry 225 million passengers by June 2026. Speaking about the programme, Ryanair's Director of Sustainability, Thomas Fowler, said the investment shows that the airline is leading the way in sustainable aviation. He said, as Europe's most environmentally efficient major airline, we are leading the way in sustainable aviation, as demonstrated by this investment in our fleet. This winglet technology will help us reach our ambitious environmental targets on our pathway to net zero emissions by 2050. We are impressed with APB's innovative winglet designs and look forward to having them installed on not just this first aircraft, but on over 400 of our aircraft to reduce our emissions. APB's Chief Commercial Officer, Patrick Lamoria, said having the operator of the world's largest fleet of 737-800 next-generation aircraft install split scimitar winglets is the ultimate endorsement of APB and its products. We are both humbled and honoured to continue to support Ryanair in their ambitious sustainability initiatives. This article is by Craig Williams.
From the Herald Scotland, Wednesday the 25th of January 2023. From the Voices section, Herald Diary, Burns and the Chieftain of the Pudding Disgrace, compiled by Lorne Jackson. A trifling matter. Many Scots will be taking a sabbatical from Netflix tonight to instead meet up with old acquaintances, munch haggis, gargle whiskey and recite poetry. But the big question is, What pudding should be chomped on Burns Night? Helpful Diary correspondent David Donaldson points us in the direction of the Gusto website, which is promoting a recipe for flaming iron brew trifle, otherwise known as Tipsy Laird. If you should decide to partake of this monstrosity, sorry delicacy, it involves soaking sponge fingers in whiskey, adding custard, then an iron brew jelly. Our correspondent wonders if the makers of iron brew are outraged to witness their famous cordial being dabbled with in such a reckless manner. Says David, bars should adopt the slogan, "Wha dare trifle with me?" Hard to swallow. A curious tale that links, perhaps inconclusively, amateur dentistry and affairs of state. West Centre Didi Cudahy was on Byres Road when she overheard a woman say to a man outside Tesco, "My tooth fell out, so I just stuck it back in. Then I swallowed it. The day the Queen died." Morbid money matters. Legally astute Henry Smith from Falkirk points out that a will is a dead giveaway. Dumping on Dons. Congratulations to Darvel FC for slaying the mighty Aberdeen in a memorable Scottish Cup encounter. Our favourite social media comment about the Dons' loss to a 6th-tier Ayrshire side comes from a Twitter user who sums it up succinctly by writing, "Losing to a team that probably doesn't even have a Wikipedia page." Drink drama. Visiting the tea room of a well-known department store, reader Jim Morris was disappointed to receive a teacup with no saucer. "I asked a member of staff behind the counter about the saucers that should come with the teacups," said Jim. The chap looked puzzled, then went away and came back with a box full of tomato ketchup and HP sauce. Chandleresque. A diary tale about a high school pupil reminds retired English teacher Gwen McKean of her stint in a posh Edinburgh school. Pupils were charged with writing essays about American crime fiction author Raymond Chandler. One young scholar described Chandler's oeuvre thus: "His books were as hard-boiled as a concrete egg dipped in lava." Says Gwen, "That's the sort of simile that even Chandler would have been proud of." A fishy tale. Keeping tropical fish at home has a calming effect on the agitated mind, claims reader Julie Dawson, who adds, "Must be all the endorphins." And that was today's diary, compiled by Lauren Jackson.
Herald Scotland recorded on Thursday 26th of January 2023, Arts and Entertainment's Why Burns is Still Big the World Over by Comedy Air. The year is 2000. I'm alone, footloose in Melbourne, just off the plane, and half a world from the comforts of home. It's then I spot him from the window of my digs. He's staring straight at me from the park. Looking familiar, I double take. Half an hour later, caffeine overdosed, I find myself in the formal Treasury Gardens, squinting up at the unmistakable pocky handsomeness. "Morning, Rabbi," I say, "nice plinth," for indeed it is he. He does not reply. That moment of double take happens twice more, next time in Sydney 3 years later. This time I'm unfazed. He has brought his ploughshare, sports his snazziest tam o' shanter, and is staring across the harbour, red roses waving back at him from the bosky botanical gardens, as if in the lookout for amorous action. Sweet-talking bard. The third engagement occurs in Adelaide, city of churches. I see him on Valentine's Day 2010. He's primely erect, in a Calvinistic, rather po-faced way. Impersonating a pillar of high society, he stands tall, aptly bookish beside the State Library, carved from marble and flanked by buildings that smack of propriety. Somewhere out there, I'm told in the city, there's a study group devoted to his works, and every so often the Caledonian Society pipe band calls, encircling him with tunes, disturbing the silence of the library. In Australia, they've honoured him with 9 statues altogether, as if he's an international megastar playing gigs in a national tour, not only appearing in major venues but country redoubts. In the purlieu of Ballarat, he rivals Queen Victoria. In Bendigo, a wealthy neighbouring mining town, his bust is all the rage in the Bijou, a gallery of art. And in tiny Camperdown, there's a festival in his name, a statue too. So what's the deal? The answer may partly lie in Australia's attachment to history. In 1788, when the British First Fleet sailed into the haven of what is now known as Sydney Harbour, Scots were conspicuously present, and being aware of their displacement, they filled the built landscape with Scottish echoes, familiar place names such as Macquarie Street, Campbell's Cove, Athol Bight, named after John Murray, 4th Duke of Athol. The tendency spread. In South Australia, near the little town of Goolwa, by the river mouth of the Murray, a band of shipbuilders from Cockenzie named their new township Little Scotland. Now each November, close to St Andrew's Day, Little Scotland Day is marked by the skirl of bagpipes, a flourish of tartan and flying of the saltire. Those same Scots settlers, among the possessions they held most dear, would almost certainly have unpacked not only their Bibles, but also their burns. According to the 2021 census, more than 2 million Australians, 10% of the population, claim Scottish heritage. 3 years ago, prior to COVID, thanks to the depth of Scottish impact, 2020 had been ordained the Year of Scotland in Australia, proposing a calendar of activities celebrating Scottish music, culture and food. Scottish artists will take centre stage, ran the pre-publicity. Alas, the launch, a blowout at Sydney Opera House, thanks to the virus, had to be cancelled. A chance lost forever? Try telling that to Mary Keane, a tartan tornado raised in Drumchapel, forged in the pop music scene of Barrowlands, and now, for 2 more decades, a force in the music domain of Sydney. She sees this year's Burns Night as a chance to rehoist the flag. Burns was a pop star in his own time, she asserts, and of course she's dressed in tartan. I think it's the Stuart, but no the Royal. Come this Wednesday, while Burns suppers all over Scotland will follow tradition with trenchers groaning, Mary's Aussie version, an outdoor affair, will be epic. An hour's drive from Sydney, she says, in a paddock, Aussie for field, in Glenworth Valley from Friday to Sunday, with camping and glamping under the stars. A Friday night ceilidh round the fire pit will lead to the proper Saturday supper. The chef and piper will ferry the chieftain of the pudding race to the top table, in front of a hoped-for 200 guests. The evisceration will follow tradition. Then they'll dish up chicken balmoral, stuffed with haggis served with a sauce of Drambuie cream. Meanwhile in Sydney, next to a brothel over in Erskine Street, in the Foxhole, James and Brad, 2 Aussie Scots who run this chic hospitality hybrid, high teas by day, cocktails by night, will stage a Friday into Saturday full Burns supper. Burns would love the speakeasy ambience, the superabundant whiskies. Once the whisky gets going, the songs will get going, says James, with waiters and waitresses sporting kilts. We'll have Scottish gins and haggis bonbons, Brad chips in. If lashings of talcum to soothe chafed thighs, the boys aren't used to wearing kilts, seem slightly off-piste, the Burns supper morsels themselves will be deep-fried for added delight. And in Burns Night itself, the Foxhole's regular Wine Wednesday will be rabbi-themed. Like Mary, these lords of the lair take serious pleasure in their devotion to the bard. His famous verses will duly ring, his songs will soar. He was foremost a rebel, believed in mateship, a man of the people, and Aussies admire that. I was reminded the day before by an expat from Skye. Yes, Mary concurs, a man of the people. And keeping it real, she's hired a chipper van from Melbourne to lay on fish suppers along with other battered delights. A riposte to her Burns Night dessert of white chocolate and Cranachan tart. It's enough to make Rabbie leap off all his plinths, plough a steady furrow to Mary's paddock, downing a dram or two first at the Foxhole for Auld Lang Syne. By Tom Adair.
The Herald, Thursday the 26th of January 2023. News. Hundreds of disabled Scots face losing jobs in grants crisis. This article is by Martin Williams. Hundreds of disabled Scots jobs and careers are either being lost or at risk as the numbers waiting for decisions on UK government grant support has risen over 5-fold in just under 2 years, while approvals are taking up to 8 months. Concerns have been raised that the UK government's 30-year-old Access to Work scheme, which funds office adaptations and travel assistance so people can do their jobs, is in crisis, with the number of outstanding applications soaring from 4,890 in March 2021 to 25,103 in December. It is estimated the number of Scots currently affected is at nearly 1,800. Some 7,250 Scots got access to work provisions approved in a 3-year period between 2018 and 2021, around 1 in 15 of all those that were granted in the UK. But according to official analysis seen by the Herald, which lays bare the depth of the access to work crisis, the average length of time it is taking to approve applications has more than quadrupled from 13.2 days in 2018-19 to 63.1 days in October 2022. It doubled in the previous year when there was a 32.5-day wait in November 2021. And as of November last year, the longest wait for approval was 254 days. Nearly 1 in 3 approved applicants have a disabling mental health condition, while 11% are either deaf or hard of hearing. Leading sight loss charity Royal National Institute of Blind People, RNIB, has called for drastic improvements to the scheme, saying it is aware of job offers being withdrawn or careers in limbo due to the delays. It says blind and partially sighted people attempting to secure work were facing delays averaging 5 to 6 months in getting support from the UK government scheme that helps with the additional cost to themselves and their employers. Access to Work is a publicly funded employment support grant that aims to support disabled people start or stay in work. It is administered by the Department of Work and Pensions, DWP, which can pay for a range of support, including support workers, adaptations to work premises, and specialised equipment. The scheme also pays for travel to work where there are no practical public transport alternatives, as well as awareness training for colleagues. UK government officials say that new staff have been recruited to meet increased demand and to try and cut the time it takes to make a decision. This was in response to the scheme receiving a significant increase in applications over the last year. They say customers making new applications where they are starting work within 4 weeks or have a grant coming to an end that requires renewal are prioritised to ensure customers are able to enter and remain in the labour market. But the RNIB says that the delays in applications and claims are putting jobs at risk for people with disabilities or long-term health conditions. They say many blind and partially sighted people are having job offers withdrawn or are unable to start work. David Clark, RNIB Chief Operating Officer, said we are calling on the Department of Work and Pensions to take decisive and comprehensive action to cut the backlog urgently. RNIB has repeatedly raised concerns about their ongoing inability to administer the scheme since December 2021. 6 months is far too long for people with sight loss to be without support, with many having job offers withdrawn or finding their careers in limbo due to the delays. We have met with the DWP on numerous occasions to discuss the delays, but little progress has been made and the situation is rapidly worsening. The waiting list has risen from 9,280 in August 2021 to about 15,000 in December, and then to nearly 21,000 by the 22nd of March. The DWP needs to provide adequate resources to access to work so that support is put in place within 4 weeks of any application and claims are promptly processed. At the same time, the DWP could make efficiency savings by stopping their practice of making people go through an unnecessary renewal process if their needs haven't changed. They could also extend support packages while people are seeking a renewal, rather than suddenly cutting off support altogether, as sometimes happens at present when a renewal is delayed by their own system. The steps taken so far to address the problem are clearly inadequate. The Access to Work programme to provide practical help for disabled people to get into work was introduced in 1994 and had been supported with an advertising campaign to help businesses become more confident about recruiting disabled people. The process to get a grant starts with a telephone/online application and is then followed by an assessment. One teacher with a visual impairment was unable to take up a role they secured because they'd been waiting 20 weeks for an Access to Work assessment. Melinda Hanvey, 63, from Irvine, who has the sight loss condition Rayger's anomaly, with secondary glaucoma, fears about her future because of delays to Access to Work approval. Due to the deterioration in her sight, she was placed on the severely sight impaired register last summer. To retain her job as an income management officer with a local housing association, she asked the Access to Work scheme for help last September, and she is still waiting 4 months later. I applied to the scheme as I obviously needed help to stay in my current job, she said. But the first I heard from them was 2 weeks ago. So basically 4 months had elapsed during which I have been unable to work. My employers, understandably, are becoming impatient as they want a resolution to this. I have provided my phone number and am awaiting a call from them to discuss my options. It has been a difficult few months losing most of my sight and getting anxious about my future at work. A Department for Work and Pensions spokesperson said our priority is to ensure everyone entitled to support through Access to Work has their claim progressed as soon as possible. We have recruited additional staff to meet customer demand, which has already improved processing times, and a new digital claims process is being tested to help customers better track progress of their claims going forward. The UK government also said they have seen recent improvements in the length of time customers have been waiting for a decision since the recruitment of additional people onto Access to Work. This article is by Martin Williams.
From the Herald Scotland, Friday the 27th of January 2023, from the sports section. Celtic's Oh Hyun-gyu transfer, chase, revealed by former manager. Article by Mark Walker. Celtic tried to sign Oh Hyun-gyu in the summer, according to Suwon Sangchon Blue Wings manager Lee Byung-kyun, who reckons his former star player will be a hero in Glasgow. The Hoops completed the signing of the 21-year-old South Korean international this week, and boss Ange Postecoglou admitted he had tracked O for a while. And his former club in his homeland have revealed the Scottish champions first made their move in the summer, before his World Cup heartache, where he missed out on their squad for Qatar. Lee said, "The first offer came from Celtic in the summer. Back then I had a meeting with O, and he told me that playing in Europe was his dream. He has now fulfilled his dream, and I know he will be a success. Celtic have many good players there from Japan, but O's as good as they are. He goes to Scotland full of confidence in his own ability. He wants me to come over too so I can cheer for him once he gets into the team. But he's left me with a huge problem. My biggest worry for the forthcoming season is finding someone to replace him, and that won't be easy. It was difficult for me in the club to grant his wish to be transferred, because we know how difficult it would be to find a new player like him. But we would never stand in any player's way who wants to go to Europe, and O had a very strong desire to go there. I wish him all the success in the world, but he won't need it." And that article was by Mark Walker.
The Herald 27th of January and the Voices section. The Herald at 240, a message from our editor Catherine Salmond. I am on January 27 in 1783, the first edition of this newspaper hit the stands. I am therefore delighted to kickstart our 240th anniversary celebrations and ask you, our loyal readers, to join us. This year we will be looking back a great deal, reflecting on major news events our teams have covered since 1783. We'll be taking talking to former colleagues for the behind-the-scenes look, digging out archive material and using the year to reflect on Scotland's past and our place in the fabric of its society. But we will also be looking ahead. The Herald has witnessed many changes in the world over the last 240 years, and a significant number in the newspaper industry too. As editor, my key aim mirrors that of my predecessors, in that we will have been determined to produce a quality, trusted news brand for Scotland. This year is no different, and my team and I are determined to ensure we continue to produce the right type of content our readers want in 2023. As custodians of the Herald, we are proud of its past, but we are committed and excited about all it could become. Today, I'm asking you to get in touch. Please share with us your memories and ideas for the Herald. We are listening and are eager to involve you in what will be an exciting year for our newspaper. Please email me at catherine.salmond@newsquest.co.uk. The Herald, the 27th of January, and the Voices section. The fixture newsletter, Australian Open signs float return for glory days of US tennis, by James Morgan. For those of us reared in the 1980s on a diet of dominant, thrilling and charismatic tennis players from the United States, it's been scarcely credible that the sport and the country has failed to produce a single top 30 talent for the men's game for the best part of 2 years. But at the Australian Open, there have been signs that return to the glory days may be upon us. In the 70s and 80s, John McEnroe and Jimmy Connors were two behemoths who'd slugged out with the best in the world, winning 15 Grand Slams between them. Then came the Pete Sampras era, when the serve and volleyer staked his claim as the greatest to play the sport, setting the record for the most slams won in the modern era, 14. A mark that stood until the arrival of Roger Federer, Rafa Nadal and Novak Djokovic. Before the Holy Trinity's emergence, Michael Chang, Jim Courier, Andre Agassi and even Andy Roddick, so often the bridesmaid, all won at least one slam, with the latter trio also reaching the world number one spot at some point in their career. But since Roddick won the US Open in 2003, his only slam, no American male has stepped forward with any conviction. The same could not be said of American women's tennis. While Serena Williams continued to rack up titles and retain a vice-like grip on the number one spot for a total of 319 weeks all told, there has been a steady stream of talent progressing at impressive pace behind her, with Coco Gauff, Jennifer Pegula and Amanda Anisimova, all offering a hope of a bright future following Williams' retirement last year. As recently as 2021, Martina Navratilova put the disparity down to something simple and arbitrary as cyclical trends, saying, "Just look at Italian tennis." In this case, for 10 years, it was the girls who stood out. Now it is the boys who are in the elite. The same goes for American tennis. They are cycles, and I hope that our kids will improve little by little. However, what the last fortnight in Melbourne has demonstrated is that the wheel might have come full circle. Survey the last 8 in this year's Australian Open, and you would have found the names of Sebastian Korda, Tommy Paul, and Ben Shelton, to one female, Pegula, in the draw. Tomorrow morning, the unseeded Paul takes on Novak Djokovic for a place in the final bidding to become the first American man to win a slam decider since Roddick's victory 20 years ago. Widen the search and you'll see there are 10 names in the top 50 of the ATP rankings, while Francis Tiafoe, who reached the semi-finals at Flushing Meadows last September, is world number 15. Tommy Fritz is 8th. Paul will start next week, 19th at worst. Sebastian Korda is 26th. And there are a host of other 20-somethings, all with the potential to go further, with Shelton among those with real promise. What happened? There's no great mystery, no alchemic formula in that the United States Tennis Association concocted. No, the answer to all sporting development shows exponential gains tends to be the same for the world over. In 2008, the USTA opened a tennis academy aimed at creating tennis reflex aimed at tempting youngers away from other more popular sports. It has consumed vast quantities of investment, but finally seems to be reaping rewards. It's very important for our sport to have competitive Americans, says Novak Djokovic yesterday. The Serb might just have been indulging in some mind games since he faces Paul for a place in the final. But the wider point was sound. Competitive Americans in the men's game mean greater interest from sports fans in the largest country in the world, which in turn means greater broadcast and sponsorship revenue for tennis and its players alike. That was by James Morgan. The Herald on the 27th of January and the Voices section. Agenda. Berwick Bank can deliver a win-win for Scotland by Alex Meredith. The energy crisis has shown the urgency of rewiring our electricity system. The best way to move as quickly as possible away from volatile fossil fuels and towards clean renewable energy is by delivering projects at speed and scale. Berwick Bank Wind Farm, which submitted its consent application before Christmas, is such a project. Located approximately 30 miles off the coast of East Lothian, Berwick Bank is set to generate up to 4.1 gigawatts of power. This makes it one of the largest offshore opportunities in the world currently in development. A recent economic impact study carried out by independent renewable energy consultants BVGA showed that at peak construction in 2026 for the project could create around 4,650 direct, indirect and induced jobs in Scotland, and 9,300 in the UK, adding an estimated £8.3 billion to the UK economy as a whole over the lifetime of the project. But none of this should come at a cost to Scotland's precious marine life. Scottish iconic seabirds have been in a long-term decline as a result of climate change and a decline in prey availability. We need more clean energy, but we also need to ensure that we address the issue of prey availability in a strategic way. All stakeholders must be pulling in the same direction, and we welcome the RSPB's recent article acknowledging the need to work together on delivering strategic compensation measures that support offshore wind delivery and thriving seabird colonies in Scotland. To achieve this, Win-Win SSE Renewables has been working alongside the UK and Scottish governments, plus key environmental bodies, including Marine Scotland, to make Berwick Bank a world-leading green energy scheme that's careful stewardship of nature at the core of its planning application. Over 10 years, we have conducted one of the world's largest aerial bird surveys. We have used this treasure trove of data to refine our plans, carry out detailed analysis, and put forward a more environmentally sensitive design. This extensive research has also allowed us to propose new measures to boost seabird populations in the North Sea as part of the Berwick Bank scheme. We concluded that a key element of ensuring the sustainability of key seabird species is to halt sandhill fishing off the east coast of Scotland. The modelling indicates that species, including guillemot, followed by kittiwake, razorbill, puffin and gannet, could benefit by increases of more than 20,000 birds annually if such ecosystem management measures are implemented. Sandhill closures could provide the strategic solution needed to support the delivery of the Berwick Bank wind farm, as well as future offshore wind projects such as the recent ScotWind. We believe we have presented a win-win situation. We can deliver large-scale offshore renewable projects in Scotland while increasing seabird numbers. We must take these solutions forward urgently if we are to meet the pressing need for the green energy to power change in Scotland and the rest of the UK away from fossil fuels. That was by Alex Meredith, who is Berwick Bank Project Director. The Herald on the 27th of January and the Voices section. Zahawi affair is another nail in the Tory government's coffin by Michael Settle. Sadly, we've been here before and know how a political drama like Nadhim Zahawi usually ends. The script goes something like this. Screaming headlines about allegations of wrongdoing are firmly denied, and calls for full transparency are met with a disdainful "nothing to see here, Gov" response. Cast iron reassurances are given as opposition parties' demands for an official inquiry are rebuffed, until, that is, pressure forces the government to cave in. And finally, after the inquiry reports, the minister, usually snapped, looking grim-faced in the back of a government limousine, is forced to resign in disgrace. So now, Rishi Sunak's extended baptism of fire continues. Understandably, the Prime Minister is livid with his Treasury successor, given his determined attempt to draw a line under the Boris Johnson era of dishonesty, having promised to govern with integrity, professionalism and accountability. Yesterday, the PM was hosting his cabinet chums, including the beleaguered Conservative chairman, at his country pile in deepest Buckinghamshire to magic up a plan to win the general election. Mr. Zahawi, whose role would normally put him at the helm of the party's election campaigning, was not expected to play a significant role at Chequers meeting, which says something. In politics, perception isn't everything, but from time to time it comes pretty close. Sir Laurie Magnus, Mr. Sunak's ethics advisor, is looking into whether the Stratford-upon-Avon MP broke the ministerial code, whose general principle is that ministers are expected to uphold the highest standards of propriety and ensure no conflict arises or could reasonably be perceived to arise between their public duties and their private interests, financial or otherwise. So, what's important is not just the reality of a situation, but also the perception of that reality. And yet, in the Zahawi case, we don't even have to rely on our perception because some facts are already known. For example, we know Mr. Zahawi is avoided paying more than £300 million in tax owed to the public purse. Not only that, he was fined another million or so for his carelessness, which translates into everyday language as negligence. And not only that, he did so while he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, the minister in charge of the tax system. You couldn't make it up. Yesterday, Jim Hara, the HMRC boss, didn't help the Cabinet Minister's cause when he told MPs regarding tax compliance there were no penalties for innocent errors. Furthermore, we know this run-in with the taxman somehow slipped Mr. Zahawi's mind when he gave the PM reassurance about his tax affairs, which meant last week Mr. Sunak was left out on a limb when he told his MPs his cabinet colleague had answered all matters about his tax affairs in full, when he did nothing of the kind. Then there is the little matter of the Cabinet Office vetting process. How could its propriety and ethics team have missed the Tory chairman's contretemps with the HMRC? Or did it? Surely, civil servants must have mentioned this to the man who made Mr. Zahawi Chancellor. But then that man was Boris Johnson. Some might argue that the question answers itself. Whitehall sources indicate Cabinet Secretary Simon Case, the Civil Service Chief who cleared the under-fire minister for his numerous government roles, is thought to be in a slow-motion exit and will be gone by the summer. During Prime Minister's questions, the most interesting aspect of this week's bruising encounter was how Sir Keir Starmer sought to link Mr. Sunak's handling of the Zahawi row with the PM's billionaire wife, Akshata Murthy, who has held on non-domiciled status, which could have significantly reduced her UK tax bill. The Labour leader twisted the knife, telling MPs we all know why Prime Minister was reluctant to ask his party chair questions about family finances and tax avoidance, suggesting the number 10 job was too big for Mr. Sunak. Sir Keir then pressed his favourite button, adding, "His failure to sack him when the whole country can see what's going on shows how hopelessly weak he is. A Prime Minister overseeing chaos, overwhelmed at every turn." Later, the PM's spokeswoman steadfastly refused to say if a boss had ever had to pay a penalty to the HMRC, stressing a person's tax matters were confidential. But once the Chief Comrade's office had made it clear their man had never had to pay such a penalty, Downing Street relented and said neither had Mr. Sunak. With more revelations about the bullying claims hanging over Dominic Raab, which the PM's deputy denies, suggesting they now involve some 24 civil servants in yet another row concerning Mr. Johnson, taxpayers face stumping up £222,000 in legal fees for the ex-PM's defence against allegations he misled Parliament over Partygate. Mr. Sunak could be forgiven for feeling the Downing Street walls are closing in on him. Now, we eagerly await the report of his ethics SAR. Despite even many Tory MPs privately believing otherwise, it's possible Sir Laurie could remarkably clear the party chairman, who has repeatedly insisted he is confident he has acted properly throughout. Intriguingly, the Downing Street pointed out how Ministerial Code had recently been updated, so it's no longer a binary decision. And it's great, perhaps. It must be remembered the PM reappointed Suella Braverman as Home Secretary just days after she quit the Cabinet for breaking the Ministerial Code. The PM, we are told, wants the Magnus report on his desk within days, so that if he were to have to jettison his Cabinet chum, the political damage could be absorbed as quickly and as far away from the May local elections in England as possible. Given what we already know, it seems inescapable to conclude Mr. Zahawi is following a well-trodden path of many previously less than transparent ministers, making him, to use a technical term, toast. After his widely regarded triumph in helping to speed up the COVID vaccination programme, the party chairman's forced departure would mean his most telling contribution to the Conservatives government's electoral cause will be to hammer another nail in its coffin. That was by Michael Settle.
From the Herald, Monday the 30th of January 2023. Sports section. How the SPFL Trust's £100,000 pledge is helping clubs tackle poverty. By Liam Bryce. There's a striking statistic at the heart of the SPFL Trust's official website, the kind that compels you to blink and look again. It reads, if you live within 10 miles of an SPFL stadium, you're 3 times more likely to experience poverty. There may well be a creeping sense that the game has been slowly taking away from the working class, but clubs remain quite literally rooted in their communities, upon which hardship and deprivation is forever foisted. This is a fact not lost on them one bit, nor in the corner of Hampden from which the league body's official charity operates. It's staggering, said CEO Nicky Reid. It's statistical postcode data, you can't argue with it. It's based on the postcode of the football club and the 10-mile radius thereof. We know from the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation data whether households in these areas are more likely to live in poverty. I should stress it's not because you live within 10 miles of a stadium, but that you are 3 times more likely to experience poverty. When we were confronted with that stat, we said, that's not okay with us. All these people on our doorstep are not living the quality of life they deserve. Knowing we have these resources, skills, facilities and stadiums within 10 miles, what are we going to do about it? That's driving everything that we're doing. What they are doing is striving to prove football can be a vehicle for change in Scotland. Since Reid joined the SPFL Trust in 2010, the number of community trusts operating at Scottish clubs has soared from 12 to 37. Nothing particularly to do with me, she stresses, and while clubs engaging with their community stretches back decades, these have been a paradigm shift towards the idea that football can be about so much more than 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. This is where community trusts come in, and in turn where the SPFL Trust helps to facilitate their work. In addition to delivering their own programmes around mental health and the enormously successful Football Fans in Training scheme adopted by clubs across the country, there is a committed focus on helping community trusts deliver vital initiatives with an increasing emphasis on tackling poverty. We try to be a national voice using a national platform to prove football can be an agent for positive change, Reid said. Not only that, but prove we can be trusted to do it. There's always a slight unease around football and a criticism of it. Centres, clubs, supporters, whoever it may be. A large part of what we do is evidence the work that goes on, so we can prove this is a sector able to engage with those who are hardest to reach, but also do it well. This month, the SPFL Trust allocated £100,000 to 10 clubs, community trusts, from Aberdeen to Arbroath, to fund activities primarily based on assisting people struggling with the cost of living. For example, in providing food and warm spaces throughout the remainder of the winter, but also in helping combat the social isolation that so often goes hand in hand with poverty. The Winter Support Fund is part of 4 different pieces of work that we're calling our Winter Response, Reid explained. The fund itself is the allocation of £100,000 to deliver pieces of work between January and March across the country that will have some baseline requirements. These things we know about what communities need now and doesn't really change around the country. We know what's most beneficial. So apart from these basic parameters, it's an opportunity for community trusts to apply to us for up to £10,000 to run some activity in January through to March that eases the impact of the current cost of living crisis on those who are most vulnerable, and an opportunity to do it in a way that's most appropriate for their local area. That's probably a slightly different approach we've taken this time, but it's important that it must be what each community needs, because each community is also different. Not everybody applied, but we expected that because there's 37 charities and they're all at very different stages. Some are new with volunteer boards of trustees, some of them don't even have any staff or paid anything yet. It was a challenge to whittle them down and make sure we had a breadth of delivery, that it covered a good proportion of the country, and we felt it was all deliverable based on the applications the trust submitted. We're really pleased, but we have the 10 we are able to work with. Reid acknowledges some may look at this work and ask, why through football? And yet the evidence suggests they would be posing a question entirely the wrong way round. There is arguably no strand of Scottish society so culturally ingrained as the beautiful game, nothing that matters quite as much to so many people. It puts football in a unique place to reach demographics that are often elusive to more conventional avenues for tackling social issues. We in the third sector refer to anchor organisations within communities, said Reid. Oftentimes in the past it would be churches, miners or social clubs. A lot of these have been lost. Football clubs are almost the last bastion of these anchor organisations. They come, dare I say it, religiously every Saturday at 3 o'clock. It's generational, and there are many generational things left within our society. Players come and go, but fans will stay for 20, 30, 40 years. That unique place that makes Scottish football such an exciting thing for fans also makes it an exciting alternative when people who would not otherwise want to engage with things get the chance to do so. For example, a middle-aged man who really knows he ought to go and do something about their weight because their wife tells him to. The GP they know would tell them to, but they avoid going to the GP. It's a well-known statistic that men don't go. But if you offer them that safe precision at a football stadium, delivered by their local club, our research shows it doesn't matter if they're a fan of that club or not. It's the environment, the place in the community, the fact it's not a medical feeling, and the type of people who will be delivering. They also want to get behind the scenes, free tickets, meet the manager and players. Whether they rate the manager or are a fan of the club doesn't matter. It's a world people don't get to see very often. It's a complex thing, but completely true, that ultimately is the reason clubs are successful in what they do, because they have something unique to offer by way of being a vehicle for change. The hope and expectation within the SPFL Trust is the winter funding will make a substantial difference over the next few months. And while Reid emphasises their work is less about direct delivery than the club trusts doing tireless work on the ground, they are still doing whatever they can for people in crisis. Even small, seemingly insignificant things can make a difference. The SPFL Trust website now has a section dedicated to the cost of living crisis, the reasons for which may only be fully appreciated by those using the services. It's the background to everything we're doing, Reid said. The creation of that part of the website was one of the 4 things we committed to for the winter. It came from feedback from a couple of brilliant ladies living in poverty. They're involved with an organisation in Edinburgh and came to chat with us about their experiences. There's a lot more in work poverty. People who have been on that cusp and now find themselves really struggling. What they said was, there's all these websites, citizens' advice, deadlines, but if you're sitting in an office library or borrowing your friend's laptop, people want to retain their self-esteem. Logging onto something that is so obviously that puts a lot of people off. We wanted to create space on our website that if you looked at a glance, it wouldn't jump out that you're on a debt advice website or looking for a food bank. It was just somewhere all that information could be held. All we're really doing is using our platform to share it in a different way. We emailed all the clubs and trusts to give them links to that information, suggesting they may want to send it out to season ticket holders and community programmes. Honestly, if one person gets some help through it, that's enough. One person is one too many to be in the situation they're in. But if the information makes someone feel more comfortable about accessing help, isn't that a great thing? That article was by Liam Bryce.
From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 30th of January 2023, from the Voices section, Agenda, an evil to which we must say never again, by Henry Maytles. Henry Maytles is Emeritus Professor of Education at the University of the West of Scotland. The Holocaust, the attempted genocide of Jews and Sinti, and the associated murder of other subhumans with its 12 million victims, was the most brutal act of the 20th century. Even the battle-hardened Russian troops who liberated Auschwitz were shocked at what they found. Medical experiments, mass murder, starvation, slave labour, gas chambers, crematoria, disease, horror. The Holocaust evokes for most people the ultimate in inhumanity, with its legacy of the writings and memory of survivors and other eyewitnesses, the spokespersons for those millions without voice. They tell us a story of systematic and ongoing brutality. However, it was not just the scale and savagery of the slaughter, but rather the thoroughly capitalist nature of the Holocaust, both in its planning and implementation, that makes the Holocaust such an event. One Auschwitz officer even described the camp as murder by assembly line, as the most advanced industrial methods of vast military economy were put to genocide. The planning of the Holocaust at Vanity in January 1942, the train system, the research and development into efficient gas for the ovens, the country's best engineering firms competing for the contract to build the most efficient crematoria, the fact that healthy Jews were not exterminated immediately but, particularly in times of labour shortage, were worked to death as slave labour, resembled normal industrial capitalist activity, as modern industrial efficiency merged with the Nazi anti-Semitic world outlook. Often, the genocide could appear irrational or illogical, as industrial managers using slave labour complained of how wasteful it was to constantly have to train up new labour, as the system ensured that Jewish slave labour did not live too long. Also, on occasion, the transport of Jews could seem to go counter to the war effort. On D-Day itself, June 6, 1944, the Allied invasion of France, a main concern of German High Command was the transport of a few hundred Greek Jews to Auschwitz. Yet, as defeats occurred on all fronts, and it became clear that the war was going to be lost, the one thing holding the Nazi cadre together was the belief that they would take millions of Jews with them. Finally, we should never forget those who tried to resist, the Warsaw Ghetto fighters, those who destroyed a crematorium at Auschwitz, and countless other heroism including the 3 million Germans who passed through the concentration prisons for aspects of opposition to Nazism. In the light of harsh refugee policy across Europe, we need to remember that in the 1930s, virtually every country put up immigration controls, and although Britain did take some child refugees, hundreds of Jewish asylum-seeking adults who arrived here were sent back to the Nazis because they did not have the correct papers. The insistence on papers by European governments and our Nationality and Borders Act is chillingly reminiscent. As neo-fascists gain electoral success in some parts of Europe, we need to remember the main lesson of Holocaust remembrance, Never Again, by Henry Matos, who is Emeritus Professor of Education at the University of the West of Scotland. Holocaust remembrance events are taking place throughout this week. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 30th of January 2023, from the Voices section, Opinion, Where is the line in political lobbying? By Doug Marr. One Christmas, when I was a young teacher, yes it was a long time ago, a parent donated a dozen bottles of wine for distribution amongst his son's teachers. The glass, however, was soon half empty. The head decided the gift could not be accepted and the plonk was duly returned. He believed our integrity would be compromised and the gift interpreted as attempting to buy a special treatment. We accepted the ethical principle and the decision while hoping he would return his bottle as well. That experience came to mind as I perused parliamentarians' declarations of financial and other interests. Registration of interest requires MPs and MSPs to declare earnings, trips and assorted freebies that, in the case of Westminster, others might reasonably consider to influence his or her actions or words. The registers may be a nod in the direction of transparency, but a multitude of questions and concerns remain. While there's no suggestion that elected representatives are doing anything illegal, one does wonder why individuals, companies and even foreign governments donate to, employ, fund fact-finding jollies and generally channel largesse in the direction of present and past politicians. There's a solid wedge of numpties and scones at both Holyrood and Westminster, so it can't be their knowledge, skills and experience that attract potential suitors. The practice is more embedded at Westminster. Those who have climbed furthest up the greasy pole present the most inviting targets. How has ex-PM Theresa May, for example, earned £2.5 million from speaking engagements since 2019? Her coma-inducing delivery make it unlikely she has anything relevant or even interesting to impart. Mrs May's earnings may have been exceeded by the great pretender himself. Boris Johnson doesn't appear to get out of bed for less than £200,000. It's reported, in November 2022, he trousered around £800,000 for 3 speeches on behalf of interests as diverse as a US investment bank and the Hindustan Times. Why is he worth that sort of dosh? Mr Johnson also has a Midas touch when it comes to getting others to cough up for weddings, wallpaper and such. I tried it out on our local painter and decorator. I'll tell you what he said when he stops laughing. Lower down the food chain, ex-Transport Secretary Chris Graylin's seafaring expertise is worthy of £100,000 a year for a 7-hour week, courtesy of the operators of Felixstowe Port. Why? His conclusion of a COVID shipping contract with a company devoid of vessels hardly suggests nautical experience or competence. And so it goes on. Even bottom feeders have their snouts in the trough. MPs engaged in second jobs, consultancy, PR and the rest shamelessly represent their benefactors' interests. Transparency campaigner Gina Miller has detailed how those accepting perks from energy and communication companies have spoken and voted in support of fracking, exploitation of fossil fuels and wireless masts. She also rightly argues for a very low ceiling on donations to political parties. Holyrood presents fewer opportunities and, commendably, a goodly number of MSPs have no outside interest to declare. Some, however, have been wined and dined at Hampden and Murrayfield. In 2022, one MSP and his guests enjoyed Calcutta Cup hospitality, valued at an astonishing £2,000. How is that even possible? Other potential conflicts of interest include income from property rental and participation in overseas trips. Despite foreign relations being a reserved matter, A surprising number of MSPs have chalked up air miles to Israel, Taiwan, and the US. Others double up as local councillors, with some, but not all, donating any payment to charities. Cultivating MPs and MSPs is a deliberate strategy, for example by the gambling industry, to gain traction and influence. Not illegal, but the dividing line between influence, lobbying and corruption is very thin. Serving as an MP or MSP is a full-time job and is paid as such, leaving no time for other salaried activities. If any believe their integrity isn't tested by second jobs and other inducements, I can introduce them to my former head teacher, for whom a single bottle of wine was a perk too far. And that was an opinion piece by Doug Marr.
From the Herald, Tuesday the 31st of January 2023, from the news section. First Minister under new pressure after trans paedophile sent to women's prison. By Kathleen Nutt. Nicola Sturgeon has defended her decision not to step in when the Scottish Prison Service, SPS, sent a transgender woman with a history of sexual offences against young girls to Scotland's only women's prison last year. Katie Dolotowski was sent to Cornton Vale Prison in Stirling last October and was understood to have been held in a segregated unit in November when a protest was held outside the facility about the 22-year-old's detention. The First Minister did not intervene over the issue then, raising questions why she did not, after last week, stepping in to reverse the SPS's decision to send transgender woman Isla Bryson to Cornton Vale after she was convicted of raping 2 women. Keith Brown, the Justice Secretary, announced on Sunday a halt to all transgender prisoners with a history of violence towards women and girls being sent to Cornton Vale, while a review of where they should be accommodated is carried out. In March 2018, Dolotowski targeted a 10-year-old girl in the toilet of a Fife supermarket. The youngster was grabbed by the face, shoved into the cubicle and ordered to remove her trousers, but managed to escape. The attack came a month after Dolotowski had filmed a 12-year-old girl on the toilet in another supermarket in Fife. For the sex offences, she was placed on a 3-year community payback order and banned from having contact with children. The First Minister was last night asked whether she was content with the decision to send Dolotowski to Cornton Vale. The prison service had had a system of risk assessment in place for many years, as prison services in other countries do. The system in Scotland, as far as I understand it, is not materially different to that in other countries, and that it is operational decisions for the Scottish Prison Service that they need to reach after robust risk assessment, she told Channel 4 News. Pressed if she was content with the outcome of that decision, she said it was an operational decision for the prison service. It was put to her that the decision to send the double rapist Isla Bryson, 31, to Cornton Vale Prison was also an operational decision, which was then reversed. She was asked why she had intervened in the Bryson case, but not that of Dolotowski. The First Minister replied, "The concern that has given rise because of the focus, I think for the general public needed to be given greater clarity. And secondly, the focus that we have seen in recent days for the trans community itself, remember, like the general population, the overwhelming majority of whom commit no crimes ever of any description, it is important to say that decisions in these cases that were likely to have been arrived at anyway through the risk assessment we put beyond any doubt by the presumptions that have been carried out." Pressed whether she thought it was acceptable that Dolotowski, who had committed offences against girls in a female toilet, was sent to Cornton Vale, she said, "I am not going to comment on decisions that have been taken in the past by the prison service on the basis of risk assessments that they have carried out. We have seen in recent days, and that's just a fact of life, a heightened degree of public concern around these issues, and what we have done is set out clarity that in many respects are given clarity about the decisions that the prison service, which in all likelihood they would have reached through the normal procedures anyway." and I think that it is important and the right thing to do pending the outcome of the broader review that is underway. Dr. Michael Foran, a lecturer in public law at Glasgow University, who will later today give evidence to MPs on the Gender Recognition Reform Bill and how, in his view, it conflicts with the UK Equality Act, responded to the interview this morning. He wrote on Twitter, "Here are 2 sex offenders that were sent to a women's prison. Why did you intervene in one and not in the other? Well, for one, you didn't notice, so we got away with it. But for the other, there was backlash, so we decided to intervene. There is no way to justify that explanation." Dolotovsky was housed in Cornton Vale last year while awaiting sentencing after pleading guilty at Falkirk Sheriff Court to assaulting a fellow inmate, repeatedly punching him on the head and body, while detained alongside male prisoners at Polmont Young Offenders Institution in January 2021. Earlier this month, Dolotovsky failed to report to Falkirk Sheriff Court for sentencing. Sheriff Alison Mitchie issued a warrant for Dolotovsky's arrest. Police Scotland have been approached by the Herald to find out if Dolotovsky has been arrested over the failure to appear in court. That article was by Kathleen Nutt. From the Herald, Tuesday the 31st of January 2023, from the opinion section. Hail Alan Cumming, the national treasure who returned his OBE, by Neil Mackay. It takes a brave person to admit they've still got something to learn, especially in middle age. Most of us have our opinions set in industrial concrete by our late teens and never change. Therein lies the rot at the heart of the human condition. It's said Socrates was the most intelligent person who ever lived, yet his maxim was, "I know that I know nothing." That lump of jelly between our ears only really works when the software is constantly updated with new ideas. That's why the old Greek also told people that the unexamined life is not worth living. To stave off intellectual death, you've got to keep thinking, evolving. If we don't, we just become a meme of our parents, mouthing opinions they taught us, which they learned from their parents, who learned from their parents, who... And so the cycle repeats. The rule of the grandparents, where we're never truly free from the nonsense our forebears believed generations ago. My own country is an exemplar. Northern Ireland, a place where thousands lived with their mind in 1690, fighting battles their ancestors fought. Thousands of others, to quote the Cranberries, just replay the same old theme since 1916. The past isn't just a foreign country, it's also a country we should strike off our must-visit list. We need to understand the past, learn from it, but not live in it. In every part of these islands, there are millions of us with a nostalgia needle in our arms. In Scotland, it's there in misty-eyed romance for some past that never was, an idyll stolen by union. In England and across much of Britain, many get high huffing Empire's fumes. The other day, one of Scotland's brightest stars, Alan Cumming, showed himself to be someone both capable of evolving intellectually and taking the past to task by returning his OBE. He put out a statement saying that after the Queen's death, ensuing conversations about the role of monarchy and especially the way the British Empire profited at the expense and death of indigenous peoples across the world really opened my eyes. Cumming learned something, reflected on it, and acted accordingly. That's not virtue signalling. It's not insulting Britain or a sign that he's stupid and should have understood empire anyway. It's an indicator of mature thinking. However, there's more going on here simply than an actor reassessing their views. Cumming strikes at the heart of one of the greatest problems surrounding how Britain understands its past: education. Clearly, Cumming wasn't taught the truth about empire at school. If he was, he wouldn't have had this Damascene moment. Few aged 50 or up learned of the empire's realities at school. When slavery was mentioned, we were broadly told Britain ended the slave trade. What we weren't told is that we basically started it too. slavery was the fault of those horrible racist Americans. You still hear that trotted out today. Some issue of Britain's past arises, some grotesque statue of some long-dead aristocrat steeped in slavery is brought into question, and out comes the but we banned slavery line. You don't credit someone as the good guy because they stopped beating hell out of their victim. Twisting history deformed Britain. Nobody can fully understand themselves unless they've come to terms with their own past. The same is true of countries. It's the unexamined life again. Why do you think as you do? How has life shaped you? How much of you is you? And how much is the idea your parents or church forced on you? If you shook off the past, if you'd been raised by another family, walked in the shoes of someone unlike you, experienced other traditions, what might you be like today? People and countries are really just the stories we tell ourselves. These stories often come from our parents, teachers, churches, and politicians. Empire's defenders trot out lines like, "But we brought civilization to the world." No, we brought our way of life to the world via guns. When it comes to slavery, they'll say, "But Africans enslaved each other, sold their people to Europeans." They did, and that's for the people of those countries with those histories to come to terms with. It certainly doesn't excuse what our ancestors did and what our country once stood for. Would the West be such a mess if we'd come to terms with our past? If America truly confronted the great crimes it was built upon? If Britain and France and other imperial nations properly reckoned with empire? Would Russia be as sick as it is now if it had faced its own history, the brutality of serfdom, the horror of the Soviet period? Instead, Russia now dreams of a new empire, as the reality of old empire was never dealt with, nor sins expunged. Maybe that's why Germany seems relatively stable today, compared to a nation like Italy. Germany stared long into the mirror when it came to its history in the 20th century. Italy didn't. But here we are, across the UK, most of us opted for some cheap knock-off version of empire in the suicide note called Brexit. In Scotland, a swathe of both nationalists and unionists cannot face history honestly. One side believes Scotland was a victim of empire rather than an active collaborator. The other believes empire was the best thing the Scots ever did. In Northern Ireland, the blood from the wounds of empire is barely dry on both sides. So Cumming did Britain a favour. He showed starkly just how few of us have really thought about what empire means. We pretend we understand our past. We don't. We've watched movies like Zulu or The Great Escape, and we've told ourselves we were always noble. I don't go in much for national treasures, but Cumming is inching towards the title. He's wildly entertaining. Check his masterpiece of Caledonian Camp in The Traitors USA. And he isn't scared to speak up or show that as a man in middle-aged, he's capable of thinking and changing his opinion. Would that we were all so willing to open our minds. That article was by Neil Mackay. From the Herald, Tuesday, the 31st of January 2023, from the news section. Sheku Bayo inquiry. Family to give evidence at inquiry for first time. By Emma Sabliak. The inquiry into the death of Sheku Bayo in police custody is to hear from his family for the first time, as hearings resume on Tuesday. Cady Johnson will appear at the inquiry into the death of her brother, Sheku Bayo, from 10 a.m, following a family vigil outside the inquiry venue, Capitol House in Edinburgh, from 9:30 a.m. In 2015, 31-year-old Mr. Bayo died after being restrained by 6 police officers in Kirkcaldy. The inquiry is investigating the circumstances of his death and whether race played a part in the outcome. Speaking at the Edinburgh vigil, the family's lawyer, Amar Anwar, said the family was asking the officers involved to attend the inquiry and to explain the motivations and their actions for the events and immediate aftermath of Sheku's death. It is what the family are entitled to, it is what they expect, Mr. Anwar added. The family is in for the long haul and they are still fighting for justice. The latest round of hearings will focus on Police Scotland's post-incident management after initial contact with Mr. Bayo. The family believe the evidence heard on Tuesday morning will be crucial to understanding the police and PIRC's, Police Investigation and Review Commissioner, role in the immediate aftermath of his death. Previously, the hearing has heard from experts in the use of police force, as well as the officers who were present at the scene the day Mr. Bayo died. On the day he died, police received reports a man had been wandering around the streets of the Scottish town with a kitchen knife, attacking passing vehicles and acting irrationally. Officers arrived at the scene and incapacitant spray was deployed after Mr. Bayo ignored their commands to get down on the ground. He was held face down by officers for a number of minutes before he felt unconscious and an ambulance was called for him. He was pronounced dead by medics shortly afterwards at Kirkcaldy's Victoria Hospital, having suffered multiple injuries, including head wounds and a broken rib. This week, the inquiry is due to hear from Detective Constable Andrew Mitchell, Detective Constable Wayne Parker, Detective Inspector Colin Robson, Alistair Lewis, Martin Dick, and Detective Constable David Bellingham. The £8.97 million inquiry, being heard before Lord Brackerdale, has previously been shown video of the incident, as well as recordings of police radios and emergency service calls, and 3D modelling of how the scene would have looked in 2015. This article was by Emma Sabliak.
That concludes this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels at Q and Review and to tell your friends about our service.